freelancer.
Praxley.
Listen, there's trouble. Big trouble.
Well, there might be, but not really. Yes, we have been at it again with another reveal a couple of years before the game launches, and unfortunately, like I covered infamously or famously or whatever back when I started my channel, Watch Dogs was the game that actually spurred me to create my very first video. Or at least my very first video wasn't me messing around and just being silly. And essentially, that was this again. Anthem is one of those games where the reveal sets very high expectations, and I covered it way back when it was announced in E3 2017, and back then I said this.
So this work in progress build, possibly from a PC build still, is showing the signs of what it would run like on the Xbox One X. You can see here when you pause it and look at the checkerboard solution, the artifacts are much worse and more obvious than they have been on other versions in the PS4 Pro. But this looks largely down to the fact that they're not running their differential filter here. This will smooth out. This just looks like neighborhood clamping to work out the average between them while you get that clear and obvious checkerboard pattern here. We don't see this in the earlier section, the pre-rendered section, in my opinion. Remember, sometimes these Frostbite games do run pre-rendered cutscenes. There is hardly any checkerboard issues here at all. There is a few as you work further into the section and you get into your rig, but this first person section to me looks like it's running at a much higher quality 4K resolution, and therefore I'm inclined to believe this is a pre-rendered section.
So, yeah, there we go. It looks like my expectations or my predictions were correct. As we've just seen at the beginning of this video, it's quite clear that what we saw back then at the beginning of the game in the first person section was completely pre-rendered. The detail, the lighting, the material shading, the quality of the visuals themselves, the character models, the animation, everything is of a much higher quality, including the PBR based materials. Now, this is not to say this is a bad looking game, because it's not. In fact, the contrary. Check my analysis of the Xbox One version, which I've put up on the channel at the same time, which is great. No, this is to say that the expectation and the quality here, this is a vast change from that original expectation, and just why expectations should be set correctly. The first thing is, let's concentrate very briefly on the beginning part, which probably everyone will focus their time on. Like I said, I didn't expect it to be in-game quality footage. The real-time rendering here looks very good and very close to what that actual game delivered. But in terms of the real-time cutscenes running side by side, you can see the difference here, at least slipping between the two. You can see the visual quality of the character models, the animation, there's PBR-based materials, the materials on the clothing, the skin, the mesh quality on the face. Look at the geometric quality of how he talks, his eyes, the reaction. It's of a much higher quality now. This isn't the same character, but this is a key character in the game that gives you information to start your first mission. So you would have thought this would have been a good example of the best quality that BioWare would have made in the game, and this is probably it. So you can see there's a huge shift between the two. The volumetric light quality, the shadow map quality, the cascade, the character models, everything is of a much better quality on this pre-rendered section that was running on the original reveal. So leaving that aside, which is obviously not as good, we move into the gameplay part. Now the gameplay part is clearly something that's much, much closer to the point where it was clearly a real game, the real game running back then in this open segment. What is clear is that version was the PC version, as I expected and said, not the Xbox One version. And this is again one of those situations where I wish teams would just say, it makes so much more sense at these E3 events to say this is running on a PC aiming for the specs of the console. Just say it. It makes a lot more sense. The video game audience are far better educated to fall for these traps over and over again. Now, potentially this is something that's dying a death due to channels like mine and other people actually working towards educating people on what actually is going on behind the scenes. And I'm sure many developers themselves don't actually stick to this. It's a marketing buzz. It's a marketing push. It gets headlines. It's much easier to push flashy visuals than it is to push a game that might perform later on. So vertical slices do exist. This was a vertical slice from a development PC build. It's probably not even representative of the actual PC version itself either. That's another thing that I've mentioned many times before. But comparing the two side by side, you can see obvious differences. Nowhere near what we've just covered in the pre-rendered section at the start. This is clearly the actual game. yes, this may very well be what it looks like on the highest end setting on the PC, possibly. You can see obvious cutbacks in things like the pop-in here, which is far more evident on the console version or demo version I played here, which pops up a few feet in front of you, and actually it's a common problem on the Frostbite engine overall. But for the majority of it, it's clear that the alpha effects, the particle effects, the volumetric lighting, the atmospheric scattering, the character models, and all those beautiful particles and lighting effects, it's pretty close to the actual game. The biggest sacrifices here are, again, there's less foliage interaction, there's certainly no screen space reflections in the actual open world game here, which are present in this demo, but the game does support screen space reflections. You see them earlier in the game in the first person sections. It's using screen space reflections, which you can see here, but the outside section, this is very, very close, and this is why I wanted to cover the title, because it's really a game of two halves. The game they showed and what they demonstrated looks very close to what they hoped they would achieve, and realistically here they have achieved that. Now there are sections, I did manage to get a game later on which I didn't capture unfortunately, where we had a fight with this big giant tyrant thing, and oh my word, it looks incredible. All the particle effects, the alpha effects coming in, loads of people shooting and flying, the sound effects, it really ramped up that atmosphere. Unfortunately I can't show you it here because like I said I didn't capture it, and I spent so long playing the game it was late at night and I couldn't bothered setting my capture thing back up again, so I just played the game. So visually I'm not really saying the game is a bad downgrade from that original reveal. It's absolutely not. What everyone's focusing on is that beginning part, and that beginning part really sets your expectation for far more in the first person view, and it doesn't achieve that. So I really wish they hadn't done it, and I'm hoping it's the last time we see a silly moment like this, because in my opinion, this is what I think about this, and I've always thought of this about games. Apart from when it all started back in the day when FMV was just kicking off and having pre-rendered video looked impressive and certainly added much more to the feeling of a game's start, once you've got to around the Xbox 360 PS3 era, it kind of became less relevant, and certainly now it's completely non-relevant, and actually in my opinion counterproductive, because you end up with people setting expectations, as been seen here with, oh wow, that's amazing, the in-game graphics are incredible, and then you get the game and you're like, oh okay, that's not quite as good. And pre-rendered sequences in games do that to me now. I'd rather have the entire game play through and look something like this, or Uncharted 4, or Red Dead Redemption, or Resident Evil 2, or any game you can pick of a modern era game and say, that looks incredible, I don't need to have a pre-rendered sequence. Now, sometimes it's obviously less work to do that because you farm it off to an outside company and do the work, and maybe that's what's happened here. And they've worked to achieve that level in the game. They've worked, and they've done well. They've achieved a close replication of that original pre-rendered, or at least, you know, offline render that's going on in whatever engine that was rendering in. But the gameplay itself, the visual quality, what's been delivered here, stands proud and has proven them right. They have really achieved that quality. They weren't lying. That was a real game. That was a real vertical slice of the real engine, and this results here prove that they can achieve that on Xbox One X hardware. The performance is one of the biggest problems, which you can check out in my full analysis, and again that does cover the game in far more detail. This was really just a comparison between that version, this version, and how those things differ. Like I say, there are cutbacks in certain areas. Ambient occlusion doesn't look quite as good, shadow maps aren't as good, popping isn't as good, screen space reflections have been removed, but these might all be fixed most likely in the PC version. And again, the average consumer may miss most of those things, but they're certainly not going to miss the point of the beginning part, which is where the downgrade really concerns. But like I say, it was nothing more than a cutscene really, and I suppose you can't get too worked up about that. Overall, it's still an impressive result. BioWare have ticked that box, and this looks excellent on the Xbox One X and certainly the Xbox One S. I'm still impressed with how good it looks on there. But if you want to know more about that version and the X, check my other video out for more detail on that. But again, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings? Are you sick of these kind of moments where you get told this, bait and switch and all that? This doesn't really count for that in my opinion. It's certainly a very minor bait and switch in terms of a cutscene, and the quality here in the final game, like I say, is mightily impressive, and I don't think anyone can argue this is a cracking looking game. I'm looking forward to diving into more from it. But if you do think I'm right, I'm wrong, what do you think is the right way forward? Do you think it's good or bad? Whatever it might be, leave your comments in the section below. Follow me over on Twitter and chat to me there, and if you can, share this video and all my others, and I'll catch you on the next one.